I think sometimes when our kids get to be teenagers, we feel like we have to put on the brakes and grab them hard. But I would rather think about when they're infants, we hold them like this. We hold them so that we are protecting them against lots of things. And as they mature, we begin to open up that hand. Because by the time they are in and done with college, we can't be hanging on.
That's right.
They need to be their own people and walk their own path. So if we are gradually, we're still here, we're still the foundation, we can still catch them, but we need to be letting them discover who they are and still guiding.
Still praying for them regularly, and specifically, we know them better than anyone when they're living under our roof, so there's no reason that we should not be the ones raising up those requests.
Right. I think that some of that fear comes in because we look at the culture and it scares us, and we see immodesty, we see all kinds of things begging for our children's attention. We hear stories that frighten us about the possibilities that await for our kids, and we don't know if they recognize the results of some of their choices that can be very, very deadening. And so I wonder if you guys could talk a little bit about that too, about just some specific things that you have taught your girls just in the area of modesty and of how to relate to a culture that is moving in a very different direction from what we consider biblical standards.
It's very true, and this issue continues to escalate in my mind, what I see. And I mean, you've just got to start early. If you wait until that daughter hits 13 and say, now it's time to talk about these issues, it's way too late. You've got to be very consistent about it. You know, when you set down these guidelines, there has to be sense that's attached to it. It can't just be, we're doing this, well, why? And when you explain it to her, I love C.J. Mahaney's definition of modesty is just humility in dress. But you be consistent in the way that you dress. If she's seeing you do things that, that blows it, and then be consistent whether it's going to the mall or going to the beach. Some people just throw it all away in terms of how we're going to deal with this if it's a prom or it's a beach situation. So you got to think through these things and make sure that dad's on board. I mean, he was a teenage boy once, every single dad, and so he can talk to that daughter in a very sweet and protective way to let her know, and you kind of inch this up as she gets older and begins to understand more. She doesn't need to know that men are visually stimulated when she's 8, but you work into all that. It's a continuing conversation. And then when she starts making the choices on her own and she realizes why she's making those choices, and then other people are looking at her, I mean, it's an effect that ripples, and that to God be the glory for that.
It helped my daughters to cash things when in terms of modesty, in terms of taking care of people that we care very much about. And my daughters always had friends that were girls and friends that were boys. And to say, part of your taking care of your brothers in Christ,
right,
just as you would want your brothers to be loved, your brothers in Christ, part of taking care of them is to present yourself in a modest way. Because you don't want to put a young fella in the position of sinning.
That's right.
And so to try and teach them compassion, modesty, not because God says so, and He won't love, God doesn't love you any less if you're immodest. But shouldn't we be compassionate and careful for those around us as well? So I think it's a mindset that helps kind of push that door open.
It does, indeed.
Right.
I think all of it too calls for really pushing the communication envelope. I have found my daughters all have very different personalities, but I've found in different ways there's a certain communication shutdown that can happen, and it can happen at different ages and in different ways. And I think it's our responsibility to be finding ways, compassion is a great word to use for that too, to find ways to sort of come alongside them, not just simply you need to tell me, but really I've had to be very creative, and I've failed a lot. I want to be really clear about that, and just coming alongside them and really knowing what it is that they're thinking about dress and why they're dressing a certain way, knowing what things they're afraid of or worried about. And so often we interpret without actually hearing from them.
I have found one of my favorite ways of communicating with a teenager who's kind of all bottled up is what I've called retail bonding. And I would say, let's go to the mall. Now, I'm not advocating going and buying them all kinds of things to make them talk, but if I can get that teenager beside me in the car, now I'm looking at the road and she's looking at the road. We're not eye to eye. It's not threatening for either of us.
Right.
And I've been amazed the things that my teenagers will say and confide in me in the safety and the privacy of our car, because somehow they're over there and I'm over here.
Right.
So it's finding ways like that. What
Take the
makes
long
your
way to the
kid
mall,
tick?
too. You may not even get there. Just keep
Exactly.
driving, or they're talking. Keep driving.
Exactly.
Yes.
And be willing to wake up.
That's right.
One of my sons used to come in at midnight and say, "Can we talk?"
Sure.
I'd say,
sure. Be glad to.
Sure. Because I don't know if he's going to want to talk in the
Right.
morning.
Seize the opportunity.
So be willing to listen and hear them whenever they're willing to talk. Right. Because you do need to, as you say, know what's happening inside them.
Yeah. Yes. And how they express it as well is very important.